That way, for those people that show up late, they can have the answers. So unlike the, hold on, my brain disappeared there for a sec. Unlike Enviro, where I just looked and quickly checked to see if the books were done, in biology, I'm going to pay a lot more attention because these completing the reviews is worth a lot of marks. And it's a really, really good way to stay on top of everything. Anyway, okay, so what is evolution? Harmony, you're first on my list or in my picture.
It's a gene pool frequency over time.
Oh, so close. You're missing the word change.
Oh.
That's okay. Oh, why am I writing it down? I know this. Right, it's a change in the gene pool frequency over time. So for example, the COVID-19 virus is evolving right now. Right, when it was first discovered, it was only transferring between humans and animals. And it stayed like that. I was reading on the weekend something that said it did that for about 2 or 3 weeks. And then there was a change, and then it was able to transfer from human to human. So that change in that gene pool suddenly to go from only animal to human to human to human, that's evolution. And as we, as a new variant show up, so the one from the South Africa and UK that are way more transmissible than these ones, that change is again evolution. Good morning, Miranda.
Good morning.
There we go. I'm just monkeying around with my display so I can make it better. That didn't work. Okay, so that's what evolution is. The gene pool is all the genes that are available in a population. So when we did the Naked Bunny lab, our gene pool started out with 50 pink and 50 blue. Another example in my, I was going to talk about the fish tank, but most of my fish have died, so that doesn't work. In the classroom, the gene pool would be we would have genes, maybe there might be a few genes for red hair that are hidden, but mostly it's going to be for brunette hair. Okay, so that's the gene pool. It's a population, and what genes do you have to rearrange? All right, I would like you all to take a moment now and do number 3. And as you do that, I'm going to flip it so I can flip my screen. Morning, Brad.
Morning.
Okay, so we're working on the review. Review number 1 in biology. What is the gene pool frequency for spots and no spots? If a population of 250 beetles have 50 genes for spots and 450 genes for no spots. Well, gene pool frequency is always the gene you want, or the gene you care about, divided by the total number of genes. So that's just a general, it's probably the only math we get to do in all of biology. So let's find the frequency for the spots. Rachel, how many genes for spots are there?
What was that?
How many genes are there for spots? In this
I don't know.
Okay. It sounds like you got company there. So there are 450 genes for spots. Miranda, how many genes are there altogether? Brad, how many genes are there altogether?
500.
Betcha. And there's kind of two ways to do that. The easiest way is, I tell you, there's 50 for no, whoops.
For spots, right?
Oh, did I mess it up? Here, I'll fix it. There we go. Now it's fixed. I didn't read it properly. So no spots. You got 50 and 450 sets, 500, or you can say there's 250 beetles and each one of those is going to have 2 genes each. Either way. And then we do the math. And I think it's 0.9. So 450 divided by 500, 0.9. So your frequencies are always going to be between 1 and 0. So for spots, I'm going to read my question properly. There's 50 genes for spots. So that's going to be 50 out of 500. It's going to be 0.1. And if there's only 2 genes and you know 1, you can always just subtract 1 minus whatever the frequency is to get the second one. Either one of those will work. All right. How did the frequency of the fur gene and the furless gene change? We're going to draw, since I got my camera going, a little chart, and it will help you guys. So when we started, Clarissa, no, not you, sorry. Sammy, when we started the bunny lab, how many blue chips did we have?
50.
Okay, and how many pink?
50.
So our frequency was 0.5. We knew that from before. So they both started out in the middle. Clarissa, what happened to the fur or the blue ones over time?
They increased?
Right.
Yeah.
That's completely right. I got to make sure you answered the question, even though my brain was thinking of something else. Because the actual number of chips didn't increase, but the frequency increased. So over time, they went like this. So this is the furred one. And the pink ones, they decreased over time because those were getting killed off. I like graphs, so I drew a graph, but you're completely fine. What happened to the frequency of the furred gene? You can just say it increased. And the furless decreased. All right, what would happen if the bunny lab took place in a very warm tropical country? What might have happened to the gene frequencies? Miranda, how about you?
I don't know.
No, no guesses. Anybody?
The furs would decrease and the furless would increase.
Nice. I was actually, I found an article, so trying to remember how it all worked. There was a furless baby bunny that was born in Texas, and they started using it for research. And what they actually found is the rabbits without fur had a lower body temperature. Their average daily weight gain was actually bigger. And by the time they got, oh, I'm sorry to say this, by the time they got to butchering stage, they were about 200 grams heavier than the bunnies with fur. So in a hot environment, the furless ones actually did much better. All right, rock pocket mouse. That's probably one of the most important videos that we see. There's this one, there's one on the finch on the Galapagos Islands that we'll look at too. That's really good. So if we think about the rock pocket mouse, they lived on the light colored sand. And when, at the beginning, at the light colored sand, what color were most of the mice, Rachel? Were they light colored or dark colored? Miranda, how about you? My goodness, no one's talking to me. Harmony, help me out.
I didn't do it yet, but I'm guessing light colored.
Good job. Well, this will be a little preview for the lab. Thank you for being honest. Okay, most were light colored. Sammy, why were most of them light colored?
They were mostly light colored. I'm not sure because of evolution. I don't know.
No,
The
because they
ground
blended.
was light colored.
What was that, Brad?
The
Sand.
ground was light colored? It
Yeah.
was-
Most of the predators are sight.
Visual predator.
Thank you. That's the word I want. Visual predators. So as the hawk is flying over, the owl is flying over, they're going to see any dark ones, but they're not going to see the light ones. So the light ones tend to be the ones that survived and made more babies because they blended in. With the sand. But then I think they said it was 1,000 years ago, there was some volcanic eruptions and there was lava, but the lava was dark. So suddenly any of the light colored mice that tootled off onto the dark lava, they were standing out. So they were going to get eaten by the predators. But now the dark colored mice were the ones that survived. As long as they stayed on the lava, they did much better. So they'd be able to exploit a new food source. So the dark lava came, lava dark. And their gene frequency, there, I'll just use that. Increased. So it really depended on the background. I'm going to stop the share for a second. I want to see if I can find. Okay, sorry, I probably disappeared on you. Or worse. You just have me staring at my screen. Okay, so we're going to look at the peppered wasp. We may come back. Come on, work for me. All right, so here's a different example. This is me, I get to be a bird, okay? Which colored moths can you see? Oh goodness.
The dark ones.
Right, you can see the dark ones. Now, if you look really close, can you see the light one that just is tootling by?
Yeah.
that that I'm terribly missing at. But you can see how with the different background, with the light background, those light ones are blending in really well and the dark ones are not. I suck at this game. But that was just a quick example. No, I want to go. I need to stop. Hopefully that's not going to be too interruptive. Okay, back to our questions. There we go. Okay. So why did some of the mice have white underbellies? Does anybody remember?
Could it be like a mutation? It's random.
It was. But the biggest thing is, if all the predators are visual, is that white underbelly going to matter?
No.
It's not going to matter at all. They're not going to see it. I mean, if it was a white spot on their back, then if they were on the dark lava, it would definitely show up. But it had nothing to do with their survival. So whether they had it or not, it didn't matter. That's kind of what the answer is. It might be easier for the mouse not to have to put color into the fur. I don't know. But basically, it had nothing to do with their survival, so it didn't matter. How did the dark mice arrive in the first place? Clarissa.
I don't know.
All right. Hey, Michelle, how about you? Did you watch the thing about the dark mice?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Anybody watch
Is
the
it
thing?
in the email?
Did I get your email?
No. Is it sent in an email?
I don't know.
I'll check Brightspace.
Okay, that's the best choice.
You put the gene
Yes. We're
mutated.
lucky. Go ahead, Brad. It was just a mutation, guys. So MCR1 or something like that. It was just a mutation in a gene. And then some of the mice made more, put more color in their fur, in other words, made them darker. All right, so on to number 9. What's a mutation? It's just a change in a gene. Nothing more complicated than that. And it can be the change in a single base in the gene, or it can be, excuse me, the change in a bunch of bases. And we'll get into that later. Because you can add, you can subtract, you can move them from place to place. And how are mutations caused? Well, there's a lot of different things. It can be as simple as just bad luck, just a copying error. There can be things in the environment that cause it. Can you guys think of anything in the environment, any one of you, that causes mutations?
Radiation.
Radiation is the big one, right? That's why when you go and get x-rays, they always cover up your reproductive organs. Okay. Chemicals in the environment, sunlight. Sunlight can damage DNA. And that's all I can think of at this point. So it can be the environment, it can be just bad luck. And there's certain chemicals that if you take them into your body, they can also cause problems or cause mutations. All right, so mutations are random, evolution or not. I can't emphasize enough that you really, 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 really want to watch that rock pocket mouse thing because it's a really good explanation. So the idea is mutations just happen. They're neither good nor bad, but how those mutations work in the environment is what evolution is about. So evolution isn't random. It first depends on the mutation, but then it's survival in the environment. So if a mouse has light fur and it's on sand, then it's going to be the one, the gene frequency is going to go up. If it's a dark mouse on sand, then probably the gene frequency is going to go down, just like the furless bunnies. But if you change the environment or the conditions they live in, that can all change. Okay, so number 12, what did the scientists find out about dark mice from other lava flows? So in the video, I found it kind of nasty. He pulls out that tray and there's all these little dead mice sitting there. And he says, oh, well, this is from a different lava flow. Was it the same gene or a different gene?
They all had different genes, but they look the same.
Boom. Thank you, Brad. That's exactly it. So there's more than one way to get the mutation. All right, artificial selection. I talked about it in terms of the fish in the tank, but getting dogs, different breeds of dogs, different breeds of cattle. If you ever Google or have seen something about how plants evolve over time, corn traditionally looked more like grass. And then people would just pick the ones that had the most kernels on it and replant that year after year. And after many, 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 many generations, it's the corn or maize that we have today. All right, 5 fingers of evolution. Okay, Harmony, Pinky.
Population shrinking or small populations.
Yes. Okay, so again, if there's a zombie apocalypse and our classroom was all that was left for breeding population, that's really going to change our gene pool frequency. The ring finger, Miranda.
I don't know.
Okay, Clarissa, do you remember the ring finger?
No.
All right, y'all need to watch the 5 Fingers of Evolution. It's a TED Ed video. It's quite lovely. That's for non-random mating or sexual selection. So that's maybe somebody decides that blue eyes are the best thing ever. And then everybody wants to find a blue-eyed boyfriend or girlfriend. That's going to change your gene frequency. Like I said in class, when I was growing up, redheads were like, ew. And now they're like hot and sexy. So it just changes over time. Middle finger, Sammy.
Mutation.
That's right. That's how we get new options. Okay. Pointing finger, Brad, how about you? Oh, you're eating your breakfast. That's for emigration and immigration.
Yeah, immigration and unimmigration.
Yeah. Movement. So if we all move to a desert island or something like that, we can change our gene pool frequency. And the last one is for natural selection or adaptations. That's how you start to get new things involved. All right, number 15, that's a repetition. Evolution is not random. It depends on the environment or the conditions where everybody is. And number 16, what's a scientific theory? As it said in the notes, it is based on many observations. It explains new observations and it can predict stuff in the future. So atomic theory, theory of evolution. I'm sure there's like a theory of economics that I don't know much about, but I know it exists. Whereas a hypothesis explains only one thing. So I can make a hypothesis over why people aren't here this morning and joining us in this very exciting Zoom meeting. Okay. But that's not a theory. Okay, cool. Let's carry on. All right, so why does evolution occur? And there's 3 main points. So we're going to do a but on why, and then we're going to turn around and we're going to do a bunch of work on how does it happen. So we've got descent with modification, fitness as a result of adaptation, and the idea that there is a struggle for survival. So instead of me trying to type on here, truth is I just typed in the answers in bright red, so you can fill in your blanks while I'm chatting. So descent with modification. I don't know what you guys see, but I'm going to move this over here. Okay, so back here, up top on, oh, you don't have this picture anyway. This is the common ancestor, and then over time, it's evolved or changed or modified. Like it says descent with modification, so modified into different organisms. Okay, so traits we know are controlled by genes that are passed down generation to generation. And those traits sometimes undergo mutations. It just happens. Every cell in your body has probably a couple of mutations in it. And 99 point, a bunch of nines times, it doesn't matter because you may have another gene from your other parent or the original gene where there's no problem with it. It might be in a spot of DNA that doesn't code for any specific proteins. It might be as simple as that mutation. It's a change, but it's still close to the original one. It makes no difference. But with a long enough time, mutations can cause huge variations. The furless bunny lab, what we were talking about, would just be one is microevolution. But if you leave it long enough, over millions of years, you can get macroevolution. And scientists believe that all of us really started out as amino acids. And amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. Sorry. Now, I think the notes are a little bit out of order. So we are going to switch and we'll talk about this first. So you need to skip down on your page to descent with modification important scientists. And then we'll come back up to these ones. I don't know what happened, but I didn't want to change all my slides last night. Okay, so Stanley Miller and Harold Urey, they were Americans, 1930s, so relatively modern. What they did that was amazing is that they showed organic compounds. So organic compounds are things that are living or were living, could be made from inorganic compounds. And that was in 1952, and they won a Nobel Prize for it. So what they did is they created this great big experiment here. So this is where the experiment happened. And there was water, and there was methane, CH4, there was ammonia, and there was hydrogen. Those are gases that scientists think were on Earth just as it was very much forming. And then to add some energy to the mix, they put an electrical spark because that was supposed to simulate the lightning. So you'd have lightning and they had these gases, and then what would happen is they would cool down and they would go into this part. And this was supposed to represent the ancient seas. So it was warm and it would bubble into here. So it kept, this vapor kept moving through and through. And what they found is, I can't remember how many days it took, but they actually found primitive building blocks, because that was always kind of a problem in science. Like, how did it start? I get that one cell can make a new cell, but there was, these guys were the first ones that said, well, how did that first one get started? Oh, hold on. I need to share my sound so we can watch the video.
In 1871, Charles Darwin speculated in a letter to a friend that a warm little pond might be life's birthplace. A warm soup of chemicals bathed by energy from the sun would have been, well, comfortable for molecules to come together in new ways and create life.
Darwin was way, way ahead of his time. A nice little warm soup is going to get you a long way.
Jeff Bada, of the Scripps Institution of Oceanography in San Diego, has spent his career working to understand the early Earth soup of chemicals. He began under the direction of perhaps the most famous scientist in origin of life research, Stanley Miller.
There are in the history of science turning points where we suddenly see the history of Earth and life differently. In the early 1950s, Stanley Miller, the eager graduate student, and Harold Urey, the Nobel Prize-winning mentor at the University of Chicago, conducted this astonishing experiment where they made an early Earth environment.
It looks like this sort of a Frankenstein-type apparatus, but actually it's a very carefully thought-out design.
Botta sets up a modern-day test of the 1950s experiment on Miller's original lab equipment.
One flask contains water. That's to simulate the ocean. The other flask has just got the gases in it. So this is the atmosphere.
Just as it does in nature, water from the ocean evaporates and rises into the atmosphere, where it condenses and returns to the ocean. Miller simulated what he believed to be the atmosphere of early Earth, with different gases, like ammonia and methane. Then he added a spark of genius.
Miller and Urey decided to use a spark to simulate lightning because that's such a ubiquitous process in the atmosphere of the Earth.
That was the real inspiration, these little electric sparks. They acted like simulated lightning.
The energy from the spark of lightning breaks down the gas and water molecules, so they can undergo further chemical reactions.
To their astonishment, when they turned this apparatus on, after only a couple of days, you started seeing this pink color developing. And then a few more days, black, oily goo is forming around the electrodes.
The electrodes get covered with new substances, organic compounds usually associated with life.
And it wasn't just any organic compound. It was amino acids that make proteins the ingredients for life.
Amino acids are the building blocks of life. They form proteins, which are the key component of muscles and other tissues.
People thought, aha, this is a key step in the origin of life.
And you really believe that you can bring life to the dead? That body is not dead. It has never lived. I created it.
The experiment raised the fear that a Frankenstein creation, like in this classic film, was just around the corner.
It's moving.
People were saying they made Frankenstein in a test tube.
It's alive! It's alive! Now I know what it feels like to be God.
Had Miller and Urey cooked up life in a test tube?
Many of the news headlines were saying life created in the laboratory, life created in a test tube. Well, of course, that was wrong. The real news was that he'd made these compounds that are part of life.
So that was what they did. That was amazing. So they said once they ran this thing, it was about 2 days, and they were starting to get some kind of change in the solution, which there shouldn't have been. And then in a couple more days, they were starting to pick up the amino acids. We'll spend a lot of time later on looking at how proteins are formed, but for right now, you just need to know that they are the building blocks of proteins. And proteins are the building blocks of muscles and pretty almost everything in your body. All right, so now my apologies. You need to skip up to the top to part 1C. Okay, so not all traits are carried on. Traits that an organism acquires or picks up, whatever word you want to use, during their lifetime are not passed on to the generations. So if you have a love of Star Trek or crocheting or bodybuilding, or you lose your appendix or ethics or values, all that stuff, that's not passed on to your children, at least not guaranteed through genetics. So what scientists are actually thinking is when things are passed on, it's now looking like it's a mix of genes and the environment and the individual choice. Because in psychology, they're always fighting, is it what a person is born with that makes them one way, or is it their environment? A simple example is, okay, so in my family, all the ladies tend to have, to put it bluntly, big butts. So that's a genetic thing, okay? So there's that gene for wide butts. The environment, well, if I grow up in an environment and we don't do a lot of work and we're kind of couch potatoes and we eat like a lot of starchy food, then that's gonna, you know, make that happen, as opposed to somebody who is very athletic and out there. And it's also individual choice. So it's a mixture of the three. But scientists are now talking about something called epigenetics, and we're going to talk about that kind of at the very end, I think, of this evolution chapter. And sorry, I'm not sure which chapter it is the idea that some of the traits that you do pick up during a lifetime are passed on to the next generation. There's an example that during the Dutch War, during World War II, there was big famines in Holland, and babies that were born during that time, or where their moms were pregnant during the famine, not them, but their grandchildren tend to gain weight really, really, really fast compared to other people. And the scientists think what actually happened is because of the change in the grandmother, the bodies were expecting famine. So the bodies were trained, the grandchildren, their bodies were trying to save food because they're expecting that famine again. So that's not supposed to happen. It's supposed to be a change in the genes, but there's these things called markers. And again, we'll get more into it later, that they think are actually starting to change, that can change it right away. Okay. And we are in the middle of a paradigm shift, because when I went to school, this was not an option. Nobody ever heard of that or thought of that. It was genes and that was it. You were stuck with it. And now we're seeing more and more evidence that maybe the environment can affect heredity. So that's a paradigm shift. So a change in ideas. All right.
Is that why like a lot of indigenous people are developing diabetes now? Because like back then our diets didn't consist of like so much sugar.
Exactly. We'll talk about it, but most people most indigenous people have something called the thrifty gene, or I don't know what they call it, but that's an easy way to explain it. And it was feast or famine. I mean, during the winter, there wasn't a lot of food. During spring, you might have something, or there'd be a hunt and there'd be lots of food. But now when there's food all the time, so their body would be like, let's store this. We're going to need this. There's going to be a shortage of food. And now it's like, there's food all the time and your body's still doing that. Let's store it. So yeah, there's some stuff going on there. That's exactly it. Okay. There are important scientists that you have to know. Miller-Urey those two guys is one example. I'm planning, or this year is all planned based on us writing departmentals. And Jean-Baptiste Lamarck is another one of the biggies. So who is French? You can tell that from Jean-Baptiste, 1774 to 1829. So he was pre-Darwin, just to put him in context. And he was one of the first scientists that realized living things change over time to adapt to their environment. And this went really against the church teachings. If he had come up with this a couple hundred years, or someone else had come up with this a couple hundred years earlier, they would have just burned him at the stake. But by the 1750s, you could do a little more science and not be quite so scared. So the first thing he said is that there is the inheritance of acquired traits. And if you're following along, you guys are clever. We're on page 8. So whatever you pick up during your lifetime, that's going to be passed on to the next generation. So based on this theory, based on this, children of bodybuilders would be born with lots and lots of muscles. Right?
Well, I don't know metal.
One of my good friends is a bodybuilder, and his children look quite normal. Okay. He also said that horses' legs got longer and longer over time because they needed to run faster. And whales lost their legs because they wanted to swim faster. So anytime you see a question that says, either talks about an acquired trait or want or need, that's Lamarck. And truthfully, that was pretty much wrong. It's the genes that are passed on, not the acquired characteristics. So it's, acquired characteristics are only a change in the somatic cells. Somatic is your body cells, but not the gametes. But again, we've got epigenetics saying, well, maybe. Okay. But he was kind of one of the most famous people to talk about it. And if you look in your booklet, there's a cute little picture, which is one that they use all the time, of the giraffes, where you've got the giraffe with the original short-necked ancestor. And because giraffes eat food from a high tree, then the giraffe must want to be taller. So then every generation, because they spent their time stretching their necks, they would become taller and taller and taller. That was Lamarck's idea. Oh, sorry, there's the picture. Okay. So then generation after generation, they get taller. So don't worry about what characteristics you're passing on to your children. It is your love of learning that you're passing on to your children, and possibly your love of Tim Hortons, some of you. Second thing that Lamarck is famous for is basically use it or lose it. So if an organism continues to use a trait, it's going to be passed on to the next generation and may even get stronger. So birds wanted to fly, so they flapped their front wings and eventually they turned into wings. Based on that, we should be able to flap our arms and eventually we're going to get wings too. Okay. If an organism no longer needed a trait, it would disappear. So wisdom teeth, not as useful as they used to be. I haven't talked to anybody in a while. Why, say 500 years ago, why were wisdom teeth important in humans? Anyone?
Because we needed to chew like meat and stuff like that.
We weren't living off, you know, Tim Hortons donuts and Ichiban. You actually had to chew things. Okay, your appendix. Now that one's a tough, depending on who you talk to. Some people say it's vestigial. Some people don't. Some people, scientists are now starting to say, well, you know, actually the appendix has carries some beneficial bacteria in it. Other people say just get rid of it. Our pinky toe, our little toe. If you look on dogs, they've got one toenail that's kind of far up on their arm. That's actually their little toe has gotten shorter. Okay. Other things, penguins, ostriches, and emus don't need their wings so that they don't fly, so their wings aren't functional. They're getting smaller and smaller. And there's also examples of cave animals that have vestigial or non-functioning eyes. So their eyes actually disappear over time, or at least they don't work anymore. And often they are white in color. And part of that is because to make pretty colors, the body needs to use energy. So if there's no light, color doesn't matter. So white would be the easiest and simplest one. But again, he was wrong because it's not the need that causes it to be passed on. All right, what he did contribute, and maybe highlight that part because I'm going to mark this with a star, is there was the idea that organisms change over time. He didn't know how it happened, but he knew it happened. Because before that, there wasn't a lot of science and it was all based on the church. And the church said God created the world in 7 days. And on the first day, Okay, heaven and earth, and there was birds. Nothing changed over time. So everything, it was created and it didn't change, and this was very different. And he also said that organisms adapt to their environment, which is not quite right. It wasn't the things that they acquired, but it does change things in the gene pool over time. All right, we are going to finish up. Oh, Kate, these aren't in your book. I'm going to work with, these are all on Brightspace, but I didn't make a quiz out of them because I ran out of time this morning. What I've done between here and Brightspace is thrown in all the departmental questions, the practice ones, from a number of years. And that way, instead of waiting to the end of the year for you guys to see what a departmental question can look like, you're at least getting comfortable with them and you'll have a lot of ideas on how to do them. Anyway, this isn't very hard. Which evolutionary biologist believed that an organism would lose a trait if it wasn't unused? Well, that should be Lamarck because it's kind of the only guy we've talked about. Okay. I put them in the right order. Remember, when you get the departmental, they're going to be all over the place. All right. Lamarck proposed several ideas in his theory of evolution. Which of the following is unique to Lamarck? I'm going to stop and let you read that. All right, give me a thumbs up if you think the answer is A. Either a real one or an electronic one. Okay, B. I think we have to do these as quizzes on Brightspace because this is, I'm not sure if you're not replying because you don't know or just because it's just difficult on the computers. But the answer is the theory of use and disuse. So that would be A. Yeah. One thing to look for is anytime you see genetics being involved. Lamarck didn't know about genetics because basically it didn't exist at that point. And Darwin is another one. So if you ever see a question about Darwin that says something about DNA and genetics and stuff like that, that's not the answer because genetics and genetics and DNA and all of that came after those two guys. Oh, there's another one. Which of the following statements would disprove part of Lamarck's theory of evolution? Fossils of animals closely resemble modern animals. Well, no, he said animals change over time, so that's okay. Giraffes with stretched necks produce offspring with longer necks. That's what he expected. Athletes passed on acquired physical development to their children. So like I said, if you had a bodybuilder, they'd have really muscular kids. Or the tails of successive generation of mice were cut off, but still the next generation had no change in the length of their tails. So that is D. That one is the only one. Lamarck would have thought if you did that for enough generations, you just kept cutting their tails off, docking their tails like they do on, I think, boxer dogs. Okay. Anyway, it would disappear. Which brings us to our next guy, August Weismann. Okay. Sorry. It was proved by August Weismann that he said that changes to the gametes, the sperm and eggs, are passed on to the next generation, are inheritable. Changes to the somatic body cells are not. And here's how he proved it. He cut off the tails of white mice for like 5 generations. I've seen other reports, and it might be rats or it might be 10 generations. But no matter what happened, every generation, the babies were still born with tails. So he was making a change to the somatic body cells. He was cutting off their tails, but not changing the gametes. So the gametes still had the information to make tails. So therefore, acquired traits having no tail are not inheritable, are not passed on. And his big thing other than the fact that he was cutting off the tails on mice, is that he completely disproved Lamarck. That goes against what Lamarck said. Excuse me. And the way I keep him straight is I think it's got to take a wise guy to figure this, to figure this out and cut off the tails on mice. I don't know. That's helped me remember it. So tomorrow we will do fitness as a result of adaptation. So we're going to keep going, but we're done with biology for today. And for those that weren't here or came late,